Lots of cities' subway systems have branches, places where the same lettered or numbered or colored route goes off in different directions at different points. Toronto's system does not. Is that weird? Let's find out. Many of Toronto's bus routes have branches. For instance, the 110 Islington South has 3 of them, A, B, and C. They all head south along Islington from Islington Station, but once they get south of the Gardiner Expressway, they split off in different directions. Another example on our streetcar network is 504 King, which has A and B branches. They share a common stretch along King Street through the downtown core, but on both the east and west ends, they go off in different directions. But our subway system doesn't have branches. Each line runs just as its own line. And other than things like short turns or weekend closures, if a train shows up at the platform in the direction you want to go, you can just get on it and it will take you where you're going. And none of Toronto's rapid transit lines, the LRT lines we've recently opened or the old Scarborough RT, ever had branches. How does that compare to other cities? Let's have a look.
I'll start with the only other Canadian city with a true subway, Montréal. When it began in the 1960s, it had 2 lines, green and orange, both of which opened in phases. The next line was yellow, opened just a year later in time to serve Expo 67. And then, after several more expansions of green and orange, came the 4th and so far final line, blue. All but yellow have been expanded over the years, but none of them have branches. Montréal ended up adding numbers to its subway lines, although in their case they had used numbers in the system's early years, and just like Toronto, there's no line number 3. We have subways numbered 1, 2, and 4. They have 1, 2, 4, and 5. We skipped 3 because that number was given to the Scarborough RT and is now set to be reused for the Ontario line. They skipped 3 because they had planned a red line as their 3rd line but ended up not building it. The red line might have had branches, but that doesn't count since it never happened. Montréal does have a light rail system which will have branches in the near future, but it's not a subway. It's the REM, or Réseau Express Métropolitain, part of which uses part of the route planned for the red line. Several other Canadian cities have light rail systems of some sort. Ottawa has the O train with 3 lines, curiously also numbered 1, 2, and 4, although line 3 is coming. Interestingly, Ottawa's line 3 was originally envisioned as a branch of line 1 as they share most of their route, but ended up being given its own line number. Waterloo region has its Ion line. In some spots, the northbound and southbound tracks are separated, even running on different streets and having separate stations, but that's not the same thing as having branches. All of the vehicles in a particular direction follow the same route. Edmonton has 3 LRT lines, and while 2 of the lines share part of their route, they're named and operated as separate lines, not branches of one line. Calgary's C train has 2 lines, running sort of north-south and east-west. They share their routes through the downtown core, but again, they're named and operated as separate lines. And Vancouver has the SkyTrain, a network of 3 lines, and it bucks the trend. 2 of its 3 lines, the Expo and Canada lines, have branches. Only the Millennium line does not, but it shares track for a couple of kilometers with a branch of the Expo line. And for fans of the former Scarborough RT, those 2 lines use the same technology that the Scarborough RT did, including the same vehicles, though Vancouver has since added newer generations of vehicles. But let's get back to subways. What do other major cities do? London was the first city to have a subway line, although its origin was actually a way to get around a law forbidding any new railroads on the surface in central London, rather than from a particular desire to build below ground. Today, London has 11 lines, plus trams and commuter rail. The simplest of the 11 is the Waterloo and City line, which cannot possibly have any branches because it only has 2 stations. 4 other lines also lack branches: Bakerloo, Hammersmith and City, Jubilee, and Victoria. But after those 5, things start getting wacky. The Circle line doesn't really have any branches, but it's a bit weird. It used to be just a loop, with trains running around it in both directions, but then they added an extension. Now it's operated basically the way a subway without branches operates. Trains start at one end and go to the other. It's just that they stop twice at the station where the extension comes off the loop, using it as the terminus at one end and a through station on the way to the extension at the other end. Of the lines with actual branches, the Piccadilly line may be the least wacky. It basically has just two branches, though down at the southwest end of the southern branch, there's a loop with a little stub sticking out at the far end. That weirdness is because it serves terminals at Heathrow Airport, and I guess the airport wasn't kind enough to lay out its terminals in a way that's convenient for the tube. How rude. The Metropolitan line has 4 branches, all of them toward the western side of the line. The farthest 2 each have only 1 station, but hey, that's still a branch. The District line is a bit like a starfish. 5 branches radiate out from Earl's Court Station, ranging from a branch that has only 1 station to a branch that has more stations than all the other branches combined. And one of the other 3 branches itself splits into 2 branches. Even wackier is the Central line. Its west end splits into 2 branches, one with just 2 stations and one a bit longer. But the northeast end has both a branch and a loop. In effect, the loop is really a branch, as trains don't actually complete the loop. The last station before that final branch is both an intermediate station for that branch and the terminus for the loop. Trains that have just come around the loop reverse there and go back around the loop. And that leaves the wackiest of all, the Northern line. On the northern part of the line there are 2 branches, one of which itself also has a branch with just 1 stop on it. To the south, there are 2 branches, one quite short and one much longer. But in the middle, there are 2 separate routes through central London. And a fun fact, even though it's called the Northern Line, it's not the farthest north, but it has the southernmost station on the entire tube network.
How did the London Underground end up that way? Well, one of my favorite YouTubers, who goes by the handle Jago Hazard, covers transit and rail history in England, particularly in London. And he has an explanation that goes something like this. A Victorian built it that way, and now we're stuck with it. And he's not wrong. That system has over a century and a half of history, including dodgy politicians, dodgy businessmen, and dodgy railways. It was assembled out of a hodgepodge of lines, many of which were never really intended to be merged into one system. If you gave a bunch of children a map of London and asked them to design a subway system, and then put all their designs in a blender, you might end up with something resembling what London has. Here's another fun fact. The name of the Montreal Metro ultimately derives from the London Underground, because the first line in the London system was the Metropolitan Railway, and that name has spread as the generic name for underground railways throughout the world, beginning with Paris. It's particularly common in non-English speaking locations, but there are also some English speaking places where that term is used, including the Tyne and Wear Metro in northeastern England and the Washington Metro in DC.
New York can claim to be the next city with a subway, although there are some major asterisks on that. It was a demonstration line that ran less than 100 meters, using a pneumatic tube, only operated for about 3 years, and no longer exists. The current system isn't even the oldest in the United States. Boston's is older. The oldest subway service that's part of the current system initially opened in October 1904 without any branches, but that was only temporary, as the first branch off that line opened less than a month later. And the current system is a bit of a dog's breakfast, largely resulting from the 1940 merger of 3 separate systems. We'll come back to that bit. If you've ever wondered why some New York subway services have letters while others have numbers, it's a relic of those separate origins. The New York subway uses different terminology than the other cities so far. In New York, a line is the physical infrastructure over which trains run, and a service is a route that passengers take on a train. So, if you follow Duke Ellington's advice and take the A train, you'll be riding a service that runs over the 8th Avenue line in its central section. The colors for services are largely based on which line they use in Midtown Manhattan. A lot has changed since the 3 systems were consolidated close to a century ago, but roughly speaking, services with numbers trace back to the IRT system, while some services with letters originated in the BMT system and others originated in the IND system. But yes, there are branches. For instance, the number 2 7th Avenue Express, not to be confused with the number 3 7th Avenue Express, mostly runs to and from a station near the bottom right of the map, but some trains at some times of the day run to and from a different station on a different line in that corner of the map. Paris took a different approach. Instead of letting a bunch of competing systems start up and then having the government take them over and try to stitch them together, Paris planned its métro as a coherent system from the very start. One of its lines splits into 2 unidirectional sections, one has a loop, and one has branches. It also has some sections that were once part of a different line. 2 of them got their own numbers, sort of. 3 bis was originally an extension of line 3, but when what would have been a new branch was added, the original extension was made into its own separate line. And line 7 used to split into 2 branches, but one saw much less use than the other, so it was split off into its own line, 7 bis. Interestingly, there used to be a shuttle between 3 bis and 7 bis until the Second World War, and there's a proposal to connect them and make these 2 lines, each over a century old, into a new line. The old tunnels are still in place, and there's even a ghost station that never opened in one of the tunnels. So, London, New York, and Paris all have branches on their subway systems, and we don't. But those aren't really comparable subways. They all opened their first line several decades before ours, they all have annual ridership several times ours, they have many more lines, and those cities have much higher populations. So let's look at a few subways that are more comparable in one or more of those ways. Stockholm opened their first subway just a few years before ours, and they also have 3 lines. All 3 have at least one spot where a branch splits off. Rome opened theirs the year after ours. They also have 3 lines, and the city and regional populations are somewhat similar to Toronto. Their oldest line has 2 branches at one end, although that didn't happen until a few decades after the line first opened. And in another example of strange labeling of subway lines, that oldest line is called line B. Lines A and C are both newer. I mentioned Boston as having the oldest subway system in the United States. That system has 3 subway lines like Toronto. All 3 originally lacked branches, but one of them has added a branch. They also claim a 4th subway line, but it's actually light rail. It has branches. Athens also has 3 lines, and like Toronto, none of them have branches. Line 1 opened first, followed by the simultaneous opening of lines 2 and 3. So numbering them in order is possible. Prague has 3 lines, with ridership a bit more than Toronto. None of them have branches. And refreshingly, they did weird things with the names too. Line C is the oldest, followed by A, with B coming along later. They've started construction on their 4th line, which they're calling D.
Now, while the Toronto subway system today doesn't have branches, it kinda did at one point. When the first segment of the Bloor-Danforth line opened, 60 years ago to the day of when I'm releasing this video, February 25th, 1966, the system did have what in New York terminology would be called 3 services over 2 lines. Because while some trains just went end to end on the Bloor-Danforth line, all the trains on Yonge and University turned at Museum and either went east or west to the end of the Bloor-Danforth line, producing what you can see in this map here in the 3 different colors. The benefit of this system was that it was possible to get from any station to any other station without having to transfer. If the train that was arriving wasn't going where you were trying to head, the next train after it probably was. Although, in many cases, like transferring between Yonge and Bloor-Danforth, it was more efficient just to change at Bloor-Yonge as we do today. But this system had some problems. One of them is, if there was a delay somewhere, as if there could ever be a delay somewhere on the Toronto subway system, it had a tendency to back up along both lines. Also, here at Bay, and also at St. George, the 2 stations on either side of the Y junction, the next train that you were looking for might come in on either the upper or lower level, depending upon what line it had come from, which resulted in crowds of people gathering near the stairs until the next train was announced, and then rushing up or down the stairs to try and get to the train. So after 6 months, that experiment ended. the lower level at Bay closed, and the Toronto subway system has been without branches ever since. So, with so many other cities having branches on their systems, is it weird that Toronto doesn't? Well, no it isn't, because it turns out there are lots of other systems that do it that way too. And there are lots of other systems whose naming or numbering schemes seem to skip things or be out of order. So apparently that's pretty common as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe.